fans adore him. Parents despise him.
And this next song is for every priest that said you were going to hell.
Marilyn Manson. The name alone evokes both beauty and terror.
Marilyn Manson is kind of looking at the general public and saying, look what you did. This is what you turned me into. I'm an American Frankenstein.
He wants to push people. He wants people to think and to feel uncomfortable and to feel offended. That's the whole point.
New Jersey saying they don't want Marilyn Manson to perform. Are you crazy?
I've been blamed for more school shootings than anyone in the history of entertainment, and I don't really know how to feel about that.
April 20th, 1999. The Denver suburb of Littleton, Colorado was shattered when teens Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold went on a killing spree at Columbine High School before turning their guns on themselves. A horrified nation watched the massacre play out on television.
The day of the Columbine murders, I was at home watching it on TV. Manson was on tour, and I was on the phone with him.
I was in Chicago in a hotel room with Twiggy, talking, drinking, you know.
And Manson said, oh, I'll probably get blamed for this. Kind of half kidding.
It came on TV, and I remember the first thing it said was 3 gunmen dressed in Marilyn Manson costumes.
And from that point, it just snowballed.
Since the Colorado tragedy, there has been an outpouring of criticism against rock musician Marilyn Manson.
Critics believe there is a connection between Marilyn Manson and the tragedy in Littleton.
Marilyn Manson's music contains what some call a violent message, and what some say is partly to blame for the Columbine High School shooting.
These 2 kids were psychopaths. They just thought, let's go kill without any emotion. How do you blame that on Marilyn Manson?
It was as if I had done something, if I had pulled the trigger myself.
It was Marilyn's fault that they wore long black coats and they had black hair. I mean, come on.
Everything about my message is quite the opposite. I mean, everything I say is opposing the stupidity of violence and media's perpetuation to make violent offenders into folk heroes by putting them on the cover of Time magazine.
Manson was scheduled to appear just a week later in Denver, just miles from the site of the massacre.
And last night, demonstrators protested what could be Manson's last performance for a while.
Under pressure from city officials, the concert promoter canceled the show.
It was a bit much to handle. Turn on CNN and Fox News and hear about Marilyn Manson being accused of influencing kids to shoot up schools.
Being blamed for an atrocity took an emotional toll. Manson personally canceled the 5 remaining tour dates.
It really devastated him to the point where people really thought he was responsible for it.
It would freak me out too if someone told me I'm the reason why a bunch of kids died.
When something like that happens, it's very hard to deal with, but that comes along with our territory, unfortunately.
He represented a threat to society, and Manson was an effigy during that time period.
Slowly, investigations shed light on the killer's backgrounds.
And here it turned out that they were actually not fans of Manson.
But even this revelation couldn't stop the torrent of criticism directed at him.
After Columbine happened, Manson went into a self-imposed exile. The media response and America's response was exactly the type of behavior that Manson had always indicted to begin with, and he refused to play a part in that.
When he finally returned to Colorado 2 years after Columbine, Manson reached out to some of the victims.
I met one of the survivors, the kid that's in the wheelchair that was shot in the back. Basically, I was really concerned about how he felt towards me if I held some sort of blame in his mind. and he didn't really even have any blame towards the people who shot him.
But coming back to the very area where the Columbine killings occurred was a risky move.
I remember being at Mile High Stadium in Denver with numerous death threats.
He had 20 plainclothes police officers as his personal bodyguard that day.
I got calls from everyone in my family. My mother, scared most of all. Everyone told me, do not go on stage. Why would you do it? What do you have to prove?
It was scary seeing the laser pointers coming on stage at Manson, where you never knew if it was something off a real scope.
And I figured, if anyone wants to kill me, it's Mile High Stadium. I'm a sitting target, but I have to do it. If I'm willing to say that I live for my art, I have to be willing to die for it.
Manson would have the last word on the Columbine tragedy. In 2001, director Michael Moore interviewed him for a documentary on gun violence, asking what he would have said to the students at Columbine.
When he talked to Michael Moore, he shut everyone's mouth, and that was the best thing. He's like, you know what, I wouldn't have said anything to these kids. I would have sat down and listened.
Ironically, America's most notorious rock and roll anti-hero came from a town that celebrates all American heroes, Canton, Ohio, home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The future Antichrist superstar was born Brian Warner on January 5th, 1969. His mother, Barbara, a former nurse, doted on her only child.
My mother was always very odd when I was growing up. She kept me very close to her.
I think she lived a lot through him, and so she was a little bit obsessive about him.
His mother used to beat the hell out of neighbors for even looking at him crossways.
But Barbara's fierce protection was rooted in the unusual health risk Brian faced as a result of his father Hugh Warner's tour of duty during the Vietnam War.
I was in the Air Commandos. I sprayed Agent Orange.
I've got all that Agent Orange in me, so I had to go to a lot of government testings when I was a kid.
So he was subjected to a lot of children that had deformities and missing legs and arms, and so that was a little traumatic.
Obviously, it hasn't affected me whatsoever.
Whatever doesn't kill you is gonna leave a scar.
The test results found Brian suffered no damage from his father's exposure to the toxic chemical. The Warners put the stressful experience behind them. They focused on Brian's education, choosing a private Christian school with a reputation for academic excellence. Little did they know, this experience would turn him into a holy terror. Controversial rocker Marilyn Manson grew up as Brian Warner in the early 70s in small-town Ohio, where he attended Heritage Christian School.
It was a non-denominational private school. Excellent education.
But as he got older, he chafed against what he considered its oppressive environment.
He really liked it until the later years, where they started trying to mold the children's minds to a certain form of religion. Just scared the bejesus out of him. He was afraid he'd come home and find everybody dead, burnt, and gone to hell.
His first instinct was to rebel.
I was an early dealer in the vices. I sold candy because at Christian school candy was contraband. I started my own comic book. It had some off-color comments in it that I got in trouble for.
He wanted to push the envelope even then.
But the biggest taboo? Heavy metal rock music. The school saw it as a gateway to sex, drugs, and the occult, and urged students to stay away.
So in Heritage Christian School, I was introduced to heavy metal by being told not to listen to it. They would play records backwards, and they would say, whatever you do, don't listen to this.
But Brian was hooked.
He loved Kiss. He loved playing the drums back then. In fact, he had a Kiss drum set. One year we dressed up for Halloween. Brian did all our makeup.